Some sins do not die with the sinner. They seep into the soil, poison the water, and become an inheritance passed down from one generation to the next. In the humid, aristocratic world of Tidewater, Virginia, the Blackwood name had once been synonymous with power and old money, but by 1845, it had become a name spoken in hushed, fearful tones. It was the name of a family consumed by a quiet madness, a family living under the shadow of a hidden, unspeakable curse, orchestrated by the patriarch himself. The curse began, as it so often does, with a death. After his wife Elizabeth was taken by a sudden fever, Silas Blackwood, the reclusive master of Blackwood Grove, retreated from the world. He became a ghost in his own home, a man haunted not by the loss of his wife, but by a consuming, obsessive fear for the future of his bloodline. He was the last male heir of a proud, decaying dynasty, and he was left with only 3 daughters. To him, this was not a family, it was a crisis, a legacy on the brink of extinction. And in the lonely, echoing halls of his decaying mansion, Silas Blackwood conceived a monstrous solution. A plan he cloaked in the language of stewardship and divine purpose. He decided he would not just save the Blackwood line, he would purify it, he would fortify it, he would breed a new generation bound to the estate not just by chains, but by blood. His daughters, Eleanor, the eldest, filled with a silent, simmering resentment, Clara, the quiet, observant one, and Ruth, the youngest and most fragile, became the vessels for his twisted ambition. They were his most prized possessions, and now they would be his most valuable breeding stock. He began to isolate them completely, cutting them off from the society they were born to join. No more church socials, no more visits from neighboring families, no more suitors. The world outside is weak, corrupt. Our blood is old and pure, but it has grown thin. It is your sacred duty, as my daughters, to strengthen it. You are not merely women. You are the saviors of the Blackwood legacy. You will bear a new generation, a generation loyal to this soil, loyal to our name. His method was a perversion of both nature and law. He began a grotesque process. He would study the enslaved men on his plantation, not as humans, but as livestock. He sought out those he deemed prime stock, the strongest, the healthiest, the most obedient. These men were brought from the fields to work closer to the house, their presence a constant, silent threat, their purpose a horrifying, unspoken secret. He called it his Stewardship program. In the pages of this ledger, he planned the future of his family, charting out pairings with the cold, detached precision of a master breeder. This was the heart of his madness, the belief that he could control blood, loyalty, and legacy by forcing the ultimate taboo upon his own children. The first to be chosen was Eleanor. She fought him, her resentment finally boiling over into outright defiance. But her rebellion was swiftly and brutally crushed. She was locked in her room for a week with only bread and water until her will was broken. When she emerged, the fire in her eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, dead emptiness. She had become what her father demanded, a beautiful, hollow vessel for his legacy. One by one, the daughters were led to a secluded, repurposed guest room in the west wing of the house. The ritual was always the same: silence, darkness, and the quiet, terrible finality of a lock turning in the door. They were not participants in an act of passion. They were sacrifices in their father's unholy ceremony. The children born of these forced unions were a new, tragic class of human being at Blackwood Grove. They were neither Blackwood nor slave. They were both. They were the master's grandchildren, and yet they were his property. They lived in a strange, liminal world, raised in the slave quarters, but watched with hawk-like intensity by Silas himself. He saw them as the fruits of his grand experiment, the living proof of his genius. But he was not creating a loyal new generation. He was breeding a living, breathing curse. He was creating a family that was inextricably intertwined, a web of relationships so twisted and forbidden that it defied all laws of God and man. The enslaved men forced to participate in the impossible position, fathers to children they could never claim, brother-in-laws to their own master. And the daughters were being hollowed out, their souls consumed by a shame so profound it had no name. And so the whispers began to spread beyond the plantation's borders, stories of the beautiful Blackwood girls who were never seen, of the strange, light-skinned children who were appearing in the slave quarters, of the master who was said to be playing God. But no one dared to intervene. The secrets of a powerful man were to be left undisturbed. And so, behind the veil of a respectable Virginia name, Silas Blackwood continued his work, filling his ledger, planning his next generation, convinced he was a visionary. He had created a perfect, self-sustaining system, a closed loop of power and blood. He didn't just own the people on his plantation. He was making them breed their own brothers and sisters. He was not just a master. He had become a curse upon his own house, and the reckoning for such a sin was destined to be as monstrous as the act itself. Silence was the language of Blackwood Grove. It was a silence as thick and suffocating as the Virginia humidity, a silence that held within it the unspoken horrors that had become their daily reality. Dinners in the great house were no longer family meals. They were rituals of surveillance. Silas would watch his daughters, his gaze analytical and possessive, assessing their health, their compliance, their value to his monstrous project. And the daughters would stare at their plates, perfecting the art of being invisible, their spirits slowly being eroded by the unspeakable things they were forced to endure. For Eleanor, the eldest, the birth of her son had not brought the solace of motherhood. It had brought a new, more profound level of horror. The child, a boy, with her eyes and his father's powerful build, was not hers to love. He was another entry in her father's ledger, another piece in his grotesque genetic puzzle. The breaking point, the moment that shattered her fragile composure, came on a quiet afternoon in her father's study. She had been summoned to discuss the child's future upbringing. The boy shows excellent traits, strong, resilient. In 10 years, when he has reached maturation, he will be paired with Ruth. Her temperament is docile, a perfect counterbalance. Their offspring should be the finest this family has produced in a century. The words were a death sentence. He was not just planning to breed his daughter with a slave. He was planning to breed his youngest daughter with her own nephew, his own grandson. It was a spiral of incestuous horror, a web of sin from which there was no escape. That night, Eleanor decided she would rather die in a swamp than be a party to such a monstrous future. She took her infant son, a few stolen coins, and fled into the darkness. Her freedom lasted less than a day. She was caught by the overseers, dragged back to the house, and brought before her father. But Silas, a master of psychological warfare, did not whip her. He staged a far more insidious punishment. Dramatized voice, as Silas, his voice filled with false pity for the doctor and staff. "You see, doctor, the grief over her mother, it has finally broken her mind. She is a danger to herself and the child. She must be kept somewhere she cannot harm herself. For her own good." Narrator, they declared her mad. Her desperate, sane attempt to escape was twisted into evidence of a shattered psyche. She was sedated and locked away in the attic, the classic fate of a Gothic heroine. But this was no fiction. Her baby was taken from her, and her existence was erased. To the world outside, Eleanor Blackwood had simply succumbed to the family's tragic weakness of spirit. Inside the house, her fate was a chilling, silent warning to her sisters. Defiance was not an option. But silence can also be a form of resistance. In the slave quarters, a different kind of record was being kept. Martha had delivered every child at Blackwood Grove for 30 years. She had seen the horrifying shift in the bloodlines. She knew the fathers, she knew the mothers, and she knew the sin that connected them. In the pages of her hymnal, she created a secret genealogy, a hidden ledger of her own. Beside the verses of Amazing Grace, she would write, "Eleanor's son, born August, father, Isaac, master's blood." It was a dangerous, defiant act of memory, a testament against the master's attempt to erase the truth. The whispers in the quarters grew more pointed, more bitter. The master's planting his own seed now. He's not just our master, he's our kin. He's harvesting his own kin. The house was now a prison for all three daughters, but they did not all react with the same horror. While Eleanor raged in the attic and young Ruth retreated into a fragile, terrified shell, Clara, the middle sister, made a different, more chilling choice. She chose to survive. Clara had always been the observer, the one who understood the intricate mechanics of power in the house. She saw her sister's failed rebellion and understood its futility. Fighting their father was impossible, so she decided to join him, not as a victim, but as a willing participant. She began to advise him, using her intelligence not to resist, but to refine his monstrous system. "Father, if the goal is a stronger line, then you must consider temperament as much as strength. The women must be compliant, the men docile. A rebellion in the bloodline would be inefficient." Silas, delighted by her cold, dispassionate logic, began to see her not just as a daughter, but an heir to his vision. She became his confidant, his apprentice in the art of human husbandry. This alliance created a new, terrifying dynamic in the house. Clara, in a twisted bid for self-preservation, became an enforcer of her father's will, her own womb a part of the experiment she was now helping to manage. She would choose the pairings for her younger sister, Ruth. She would oversee the health of the children in the quarters. She had become a monster to save herself from being a victim. Her collusion was the ultimate betrayal, a sin that was perhaps even darker than her father's, for it was born not of madness, but of a cold, calculated choice. The web of silence at Blackwood Grove was now complete, held together by the master's obsession, the midwife's secret record, and the chilling complicity of a daughter who had chosen to become a reflection of her own father's evil. History is not a gentle tide. It is a tidal wave. And in the final years of the Civil War, that wave was about to crash upon the shores of Blackwood Grove. For years, Silas Blackwood had managed to keep the outside world at bay, perfecting his depraved, isolated kingdom. But the sounds of the Union Army, a force that promised to shatter his world and expose his sins, were growing closer with each passing day. For a man obsessed with control, the idea of his legacy being dismantled by outsiders, his experiments scattered and judged, was a fate worse than death. He arrived at the only logical conclusion his madness could offer. If he could not preserve his bloodline in life, he would preserve it in death. He would orchestrate a final, terrible family reunion. He planned to gather his daughters and all the children born of his experiment in the grand dining room and serve them a last supper laced with poison. He would turn his home into a tomb, a perfect, silent monument to the Blackwood name, keeping the bloodline pure and safe from the judgment of the coming world. But the web of silence he had so carefully constructed had begun to unravel. In the attic, Eleanor, his mad daughter, had not been broken. She had been watching, listening through the floorboards, her sanity sharpened to a razor's edge by years of solitude and rage. And in the slave quarters, the midwife, Martha, her hymnal, now a comprehensive record of Silas's crimes, knew that the approaching army meant the time for silent resistance was over. The time for open rebellion had come. The conspirators were an unlikely alliance. Martha, the keeper of secrets. Eleanor, the ghost from the attic, freed from her prison by a sympathetic servant. And a handful of the enslaved men who had been unwilling instruments of the master's will. But the key to their plan was the one person Silas had come to trust completely, his daughter, Clara.
"He plans to kill us all, Clara. Your children, Ruth's children, mine, all of us, to protect his precious name. You helped him build this prison. Now will you help us tear it down, or will you die with him?" In that moment, Clara, the ultimate survivor, was forced to make her final calculated choice. To side with her monstrous father meant certain death. To side with the rebellion offered a slim, dangerous chance at life. Her loyalty, born of fear and ambition, finally shifted. The climax came on a stormy night, the heavens themselves seeming to rage against the sins of the house. Silas had sent for his daughters and the children, telling them it was a special dinner to pray for deliverance. As he descended into the deep, cavernous wine cellar to select the final poisoned vintage for his ceremony, the conspirators made their move. He never had a chance to scream. They slammed the heavy, iron-banded door shut. Silas, trapped in the darkness with his fine wines and his rotting soul, began to pound on the door, his voice a muffled roar of disbelief and rage. "Traitors! You dare! I am your master! I am your father! Let me out!" But his words had no more power. They wedged the door shut with heavy beams. Then, in the main hall, by the light of a roaring fire in the hearth, they began the final cleansing ritual. Martha brought forth her hymnal. Clara, her face a blank mask, retrieved her father's generational stewardship ledgers. One by one, they tore out the pages, the records of forced pairings, the secret genealogies, the entire history of his sin, and fed them to the flames.
They did not wait for the Union Army. They did not wait for an outside judgment. They had passed sentence themselves. That night, a fire started in the library. It spread with unnatural speed, consuming the dry, decaying heart of Blackwood Grove. The house that was built on a foundation of sin was cleansed by a baptism of fire. By dawn, all that remained was a smoking, blackened skeleton. In the chaotic aftermath of the war, the story of what happened to the Blackwood survivors became a legend, a ghost story whispered around local fires. No one ever saw the daughters again. It was said that Eleanor and Clara, their skin light enough, vanished into the north, passing as white widows and starting new lives, their past a secret they would carry to their graves. Ruth, the youngest, was said to have joined a freed community in the West, choosing to live among the people her family had once owned. And the children? The tragic fruits of the Blackwood curse, scattered like seeds on the wind, their mixed heritage both a burden and a passport to a new, uncertain American future. The land itself, however, never forgot. The locals who live there still speak of Blackwood's curse. They say that if you dig too deep near the site of the old well, particularly on a quiet, moonless night, you can sometimes hear a strange, impossible sound rising from the earth. The sound of children crying in 3 distinct, sorrowful voices. The final shot is a slow zoom into the dark, gaping maw of the old stone-lined well, as the faint, ghostly sound of children's weeping can be heard. Narrator, his voice a final, haunting verdict. Silas Blackwood believed he was preserving his family's future, but he was wrong. Some families don't end with freedom. They haunt it. The legacy of slavery is not just a story of the past. It's a conversation we need to have today. What does a story like this teach us about generational trauma and the secrets that families keep? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe these hidden histories must be brought to light, subscribe to our channel and join the conversation.